Hello and welcome to the Other Foundation's webinar on LGBTQI plus communities and COVID-19, a Southern African perspective. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Sebenzile Nkambule and I am the Executive Officer for Strategic Partnerships at the Other Foundation. The Other Foundation is an African trust that works as a fundraiser and a grant maker, and we raise resources and in order to support and enable individuals and organizations in 13 Southern African countries who do the work of promoting freedom and equality with a particular focus on the LGBTI community. I will be your moderator for this conversation. Now, many of us in our region have spent the last 2 or almost 3 months living under states of emergencies or states of disaster, as well as living under government-enforced lockdowns. And all of those were measures taken by governments in order to ready themselves and prepare themselves for what was to come at the time and what is still to come regarding the impact of COVID-19. And as much as these measures have essentially assisted in slowing down the rate of infection in the region, it has certainly had a very dire and devastating effect on citizens in the region. And for the LGBTQ plus community in particular, which was already a community that was on the fringes and in some respects not even recipients or beneficiaries of government support, this period has been particularly challenging. And as the foundation, we have the privilege and the honor this evening to be joined by a panel of speakers who will share their experiences, who will share their insights from different perspectives, really, on what the impact of COVID-19 has been on them and their communities so far. Now, of course, we would love to have been able to have as many people who belong to our community represented on this panel. We were not able to do so, but we like to see this as a contribution to already happening conversations all over the globe, all over the region, and we hope that this will also lead to other conversations and other voices can also be heard. What we do hope will emerge at the end of the 90 odd minutes that we have together, that I hope that when we walk out of here, or when we log off from the session, that we will all leave with a better understanding, a better sense of what the extent of the impact of COVID-19 has been on our communities so far. Who knows what the next couple of months are likely to look like, but also want to be able to at least start answering for ourselves what the impact of this pandemic is likely to mean for our community, not just for the next 3 to 6 months, for the next 18, 24 to 36 months, because the effects of COVID are going to be with us for a very long time still. But without any further ado, I will allow our panelists to introduce themselves. It would be lovely for me to read their bios, but that would mean we'd be here all evening, and we don't want that. So let's jump straight in, and let me first welcome McLean Kabwe, who joins us from Zambia, and McLean is with the Lotus Identity. And McLean, welcome once again, and thank you for your time. Please introduce yourself, but also begin to answer the question for us, what the impact and the effect of COVID-19 has been on you and your community.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone watching or on the call. Like the moderator said, my name is McLean Kabwe, and I'm coming from Zambia. I'm heading an organization called the Lotus Identity. It's a local LGBTI organization. I co-founded with a colleague from 2015 to date. And just want to say that to express my gratitude to the Other Foundation for giving us a voice on this wide platform, talk about the work and our experiences and our challenges in Zambia. But I'm also a public health specialist in the local domestic HIV response, where I'm working for an NGO and also a quasi-government body. So that is me in a nutshell. Currently, I'm also the executive director for the Lotus Identity. So to answer your question about the impact on the community of the COVID, of course, most of us have seen the far-reaching effects of COVID on the community. But also, just to answer the question, to start with the lockdowns, we saw how most of the operations shut down, and LGBT organizations were no exception. So that means our operations as a movement in Zambia was greatly affected. This led to disruption of programming because you couldn't be so many people in one space. So you had to abide by the government regulations as far as the COVID was concerned and the lockdown. And to observe those social distancing, to observe hygiene, that meant the cost of holding activities shot up because now you have to purchase COVID masks, you have to purchase hand sanitizers and the like. So that was the increased cost of business to conduct our various activities in Zambia. And that also translated into reduced access to services for our served communities. So services include just information dissemination from the organization to the community. It also included health service provision. Coming from a public health perspective, where we provide in HIV prevention services, that was also greatly affected by the lockdown on the community. Then also you look at the economic side of things. How many people were able to afford the prevention materials, such as COVID masks, hand sanitizer, these are disposables, and that entails that you have to buy maybe every other day. So how many people were able to afford that? So COVID also really revealed the economic divide within the community, the LGBTI community, who can afford that, who can access what services and the like. So in a nutshell, those are where the effects on the community, although not exhaustive. Thank you.
Brilliant, McLean. Thank you very much. We will, of course, endeavor to delve a bit deeper into some of those issues that you've raised. Thank you very much. Let me also now introduce Jolerina Timbo, who joins us from Namibia. And Jolerina is with Wings to Transcend Namibia. Jolerina, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be here as well. My name is Jolerina Timbo. I'm the founder and executive director of Wings to Transcend Namibia, which is a human rights organization that advocates specifically for trans bodies within Namibia, for inclusion and for broader access to any other legislation as well as gender recognition. Well, I'm personally looking at the impacts of COVID-19 on the transgender and LGBT communities here in Namibia. Knowing that as a trans person, just walking down the street and getting verbal abuse from the police is already tragic in itself, right? And so when the restrictions around emergency lockdown started, I was quite anxious about even going to the shop or walking in the street because already my visibility as a trans person creates loopholes or creates means for others to justify the bullying and abuse of me in the streets. And so this also trickles down majorly to my communities within society, whereby you are a visible LGBT person, out and proud, and everybody knows you. So walking down the street, you are constantly in fear of being harassed by the police because the army was deployed in the state of emergency, and military officers were standing around with guns in the streets, patrolling with guns in the streets, slapping and beating people in the streets to get into their houses and stay at home and so forth. So it has quite been a very, very anxious and anxiety problematic time for me as a trans person. And within our community, as the vice chair of the K Technical Working Group, providing implementation of HI services, it has been difficult, even for members and MPs of the organization to be able to go out there, do their work, reach numbers, to provide the services that people need, was really really hampered, and it was difficult to get people on treatment, continuous treatment, and also just to access people to provide those services. Also, just as McLean has mentioned, the issues around protective gear was an issue because many of us are unemployed, right? Many of my community don't have a job, so even buying a hand sanitizer, because hand sanitizers prices skyrocketed. Face masks were being sold left, right, and center in the streets, but everybody has their own price, right? And so all of these things affected us adversely to be able to live a normal life. So it was quite out of the course and scary times for us, seeing that the number of cases were rising, and knowing that my community is at a very disappropriate stage where already in a normal stance, they are marginalized, victimized, and will not even be able to access the food parcels that were provided by government and by other stakeholders, as well as the income grant that was provided, right? So all of these things were adversely affecting my community in order of access, in order of just sustaining themselves during this course of time, and also the fear of just going out in the street and getting beaten up, because there was a time that we're living after a pride event and a police van stood in front of us where a trans man was literally asked by the police officer, so are you being funny? How do you do it in the bed with your partner? So already in normal stages, we're already harassed like that by police. And just knowing that this is also another justification for them to say, no, but they were not supposed to be on the street, further, right, infringes us as LGBT and trans persons and objectifies us as the target, right? So there was also an event where a trans woman was beaten during this time, and we had to travel during this lockdown to another region to be able to assist, and we had to look for partners that X to cross the regions and go and assist this person. And so it has definitely disappropriately affected us as a community, as an organization, as a person, already as a human rights activist, also places me in a very uncomfortable position, even just to voice out, where you are told you are not special. This affects us all, but people are not looking at how trans-bodied or LGBT people are further marginalized, and access is limited during these times. And so those were some of the issues and challenges that we have faced. And many of us are still not in a very good state where we are able to take care of ourselves. We are still in a state of fear and anxiety. As much as the lockdowns are being lessened or loosened up, there is still the rising numbers of COVID cases in the country. So there is those anxiety and scare. We are scared. We are literally scared and in panic mode right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you for those views, Jolirina. Let me welcome Caroline Mudengi, who is with the Voice of the Voiceless in Zimbabwe. Caroline, thank you for your time with us today. What has been the situation in Zimbabwe, and how have you experienced it?
Okay, like Sebenzile has said, my name is Caroline Mudengi, and I'm a programs officer for Voice of the Voiceless, which is a self-led feminist LGBTQ organization based here in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. So personally, I would say the most challenging thing as someone who lives in Bulawayo has been the water situation, which has been further exacerbated by the dense population of people staying at home and not being able to move freely between neighborhoods. Water has been a real challenge here and continues to be a challenge. Just today, the city council delivered some water and some people didn't get. It was just a nightmare. And the thing with water is there's no option. So there's no option B. When you have electricity goes, you make a fire, you get gas, you get paraffin, and you cook and you carry on. You get a solar panel, you get, but with water, there's no option B. So that has been the main challenge that I've personally come across. But that's not the main challenge. I think particularly when COVID started, when we got the first cases here in Zimbabwe, a lot of measures were put in place, but I wouldn't say those measures were tailored to the environment. Also, a lot of countries have found themselves having to react to the situation. And it was the same here in Zimbabwe, where you found that lockdowns were put in place and there was no real time to actually tailor make interventions and actually come up with solutions that would work, because the main agenda was to make sure that the pandemic does not escalate to a point, because we have a very weak, to say the least, health system. But the main problem that I think was not looked at, and I'm not sure about other countries, but I think here, particularly because in Zimbabwe, unemployment rates are very high, with almost 95% of the population being in the informal sector. And that was the first thing to be closed. Privately owned public transport was banned, continues to be banned, yet a lot of our unemployed youth were finding a source of livelihood from there. The restrictions have lessened somewhat, but now the re-engagement process with the informal sector is such that you have to formalize. In a nutshell, that's what they're asking people to do, to formalize in order to be able to keep working. But sources of income have dwindled. And people, particularly for the LGBTI community, people who had moved out of their homes, who were financially independent enough to move out of their homes and seek their own accommodation and live their lives or even cohabit with their partners, have had to end their relationships and move back home, or just, even if it's not to end the relationship, but just separate and move back to their respective families. Because what this time has really proven and shown is that a lot is being demanded from families, in a general sense. A lot is being demanded from families, where we really need to band together as families. And for LGBTQI plus persons, it's very difficult because most of us have sour relations with our families. So that totally eliminates your support system, because that is the very system where your friends and your chosen family are removed from you. And most of us have had to not be able to go into the CBD, where a lot of people mind their own business and go on with their lives. But when you're at home and talking to your neighbors and engaging, and you're with your family, being the constant reminder and an embarrassment, as we are seen as by our families in that neighborhood, it becomes challenging. And a lot has really happened around that. And a lot of people are finding themselves unable to carry on existing, and a lot of people are finding it difficult to actually carry on with their lives, because and the lack of psychosocial support, the lack of basic commodities being local shops, yet there's for going into the CBD, the re-dollarization, the RTGS dollar has dwindled so much. Inflation has increased. And I think really it's a very tense time, and a lot of people are finding it hard to grapple. And I'm sure there's so much more actually, but this is the least that I could say. That is the main challenge: sources of livelihoods and the pressure on family, and really just being unable to cope with this new norm, because even the old norm did not accommodate us. So yeah. Thank you.
Caroline, thank you very much for that. Let me invite Professor Finn Reagan, who joins us, and Finn is with the Human Sciences Research Council. Finn, appreciate your time with us today. In South Africa, as you know, we're tracking the numbers very closely. We're tracking our infection rates, our recovery rates, and also our fatalities. But over time, different numbers will have to matter to us a lot more, because they'll paint a very specific picture. How have you experienced the last couple of months under the various levels of lockdown? I'm not quite sure which level we're at. I think it's advanced level 3. whatever that means. Welcome.
Thank you, Sebenzile, and good evening or good morning to everybody wherever you are, remotely connecting in. Thank you so much to the other foundation for the invitation to participate this evening. I'm Finn Regan. I'm a research director at the Human Sciences Research Council, the HSRC, as Sebenzile pointed out. And the HSRC is one of South Africa's 9 statutory research councils. So our mandate is to roll out research and develop the evidence base in service to nation building and to development nationally and regionally. In the HSRC, I lead our work on identity and belonging, which means that we have teams of researchers in South Africa and across Eastern and Southern Africa working on issues, intersectional issues, research, social justice research, working alongside marginalized groups across the region, one of whom are LGBTQI communities in Eastern and Southern Africa. I wear a few different caps. Sebenzile, I also hold a professorship in educational psychology at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. And I also come from a civil society background. I used to work in LGBTI civil society, and I've worked in government as well, in the National Department of Basic Education in South Africa. And so I come from, I suppose, a cross-sectoral or an intersectoral background with a strong focus on research in support of vulnerable, marginalized, and excluded groups. I want to talk a little, I think, perhaps around the bigger picture, Sebenzile, if I may, very briefly, because we know that the strength of democracy lies in its pluralism, its diversity, and social inclusion. And we know that in the region, there are a range of states that are more or less democratic, more or less authoritarian. And we also know that there has been a troubling rise in authoritarianism globally in recent years. And that in many ways, this authoritarianism is a challenge to democracy in many ways. We know that there are elements within this rise of the far right, of religious extremism, of white supremacy, as we've been seeing globally in recent weeks, and of course a strong anti-sexual and reproductive health rights agenda, a strong anti-SRHR agenda. This global anti-SRHR agenda has as our colleagues in the supranational bodies and elsewhere have pointed out, has a strong anti-abortion, anti-youth sexuality, and anti-minority and anti-LGBTI bent to it. And in many ways, LGBTI people are the canaries in the coal mine. A well-known series of reports that the other foundation commissioned a few years ago, entitled Canaries in the Coal Mine, because LGBTI people are often one of the earlier targets when it comes to the erosion of hard-won human rights and civil liberties. And so an argument could be made that in the context of the global pandemic and the evident public health needs, nationally in South Africa, regionally, across the continent and globally, there are also concerns about the impact in terms of some of these hard-won civil and political rights, particularly for marginalized groups. And I think that the pandemic and state responses have foregrounded the ways in which, in tandem with a very necessary, important, much-needed public health response to support people in their health and well-being, staying safe, that there is also an importance, I think, in focusing on the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, and the ways in which they've been negatively impacted by state responses to COVID. And young people in particular come to mind, young people in terms of the barriers and the challenges that they're currently experiencing in trying to access, continuing to access sexual and reproductive health supports and services. Thanks, Sebenzile.
Thank you very much, Fien. We'll double click on particularly the focus on the youthful population, that particular demographic, and what the future is likely to look like as a result of the pandemic. Let me invite Anthony Oluch, who is an independent activist, who is Kenyan, but is currently based in South Africa. Anthony, let me invite you to please introduce yourself and the work you do. But additionally, might you also begin to answer the question around the role that the police and security forces or security services have played during this period of lockdown, and what some of the cases that you've started to hear about over what has transpired, the human violations that have transpired over the last couple of months look like.
Thank you so much. My name is Anthony Ulrich. I am a human rights activist. I am a lawyer. I'm from Kenya. And you know, the joys of coming in last in introductions is that everyone else has actually said most of the things that you were going to say, especially when you're talking about our community. But as you said, I should talk about the police. But before I do that, let me talk about the impact of COVID-19 on myself and on some people of my community. I mean, most of us have been stuck at home, and as Caroline has just said, we have been basically stuck with people who, in most cases, do not accept us, do not accept who we are, and that has been incredibly difficult for some people in our community. Our mental health has been affected because of the isolation, the being stuck with people, the anxiety of am I going to get sick? Am I not going to get sick? The lack of movement, not being able to move from point A to B, the lack of human contact, which is incredibly important for people in our community, the loss of jobs. So the impact of the mental health has been incredibly it has been really, really big on people within our community. And as you said, I'm a Kenyan and I currently live in South Africa. I'm not a refugee, but I particularly think about the impact of COVID-19 and the lockdowns on LGBTI refugees who have suffered quite a lot, who are not at home because of being marginalized, being stigmatized because of the violence that they face back home, and they're now in different countries. Most of them, quite a number of them, in South Africa, and that takes me to to the question that you asked about police, what the police are doing. I mean, when the lockdown started and you started seeing South African defense forces and in various places defense forces coming into the streets, it does raise the level of anxiety for people. It does raise the level of anxiety, especially for people who do not have, who may not have the papers in that country, like LGBT refugees, and that's particularly one of the cases that I've heard a lot of, where you have people being targeted by police, being brutalized by police because they do not have the papers, and that makes it incredibly difficult for them to exist. The use of excessive force by the police in different parts of Southern Africa, especially, including in South Africa, the fact that in the first week of the lockdown, there were more deaths over police violence than there were over the coronavirus. So that just tells you the impact of police violence. But I would like to stress on the mental health aspect of it. The fact that you, as a person who is not South African, as a Black person, as a gay person, walking down the streets and knowing that there will be South African defense forces around, it can be difficult. It will push me further into isolation. So I think that's it. That's it for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that, Anthony. Caroline, let me pick on a bit of what Tony touched on about how, for a lot of queer people, home is the first encounter of violence, and being stuck at home, being forced to stay at home because being outside was equally dangerous, particularly during this time. You touched on it in your opening remarks, but could you say more just about how the lockdown in fact has brought and created more challenges for our community, particularly in relation to economic independence, which is one of the ways in which people free themselves from the violence and the oppression that they encounter in their homes.
Okay, thank you. I think the other thing that I might have not really brought out clearly is that what's also happening in Zimbabwe is that companies are shutting down because the cost of operations is high. So a lot of breadwinners, some of whom are LGBTQI plus persons, and some of whom are the relatives of those people, actually do not have livelihoods anymore. And a lot of pressure is put. So naturally, when an LGBTQI plus person is in a family, they're not seen as a priority or someone who positively contributes to the family in most settings, with a few exceptions here and there. But naturally, usually, most families are inclined to secluding that person and ostracizing that person. So even in terms of getting bailouts from family or relatives for those that have informal businesses or those that are self-employed, it becomes a challenge because you're not seen, even what you're doing is not seen as something viable that positively contributes to the benefit of the whole family. And in instances where there have been those bailouts and families have really banded together to say, let's help this person who's just a member of our family, just as we are, it still becomes a challenge because the market has really shrunk. People are not spending money because they don't have money. So the market itself has really shrunk to such an extent that people cannot actually be able to conduct business in a sensible manner, in a profitable manner. Also, the main challenge is in the lack of security with regards to the relationships that we have. In Zimbabwe, as you know, marriage is illegal, and all the rights that come with marriage are illegal, are not there, I mean to say. So it becomes a challenge because if you're cohabiting with your partner, there's no security for your union. There are no civil partnerships. There's absolutely nothing of that nature. Actually, they're bringing in the marriage bill to support the constitution and saying that people of the same sex should not marry. So in times like this, such things really come to the fore to show that we do not have securities for our unions. We do not have securities for us as individuals. We cannot access loans. There have also been some bailouts that have been given to the general public. I passed through a certain neighborhood yesterday when I was walking to town, and I found a lot of people queuing to receive packages, monetary packages that were from the government, but also other organizations have been giving out those packages. And people of LGBTQI identities do not have access to those measures that are being put in place because we are not seen as priorities in our countries, particularly here in Zimbabwe. There might be a talk of key populations, and that's pretty much all there is. And the genuinity of that acceptance shows in times like this because there's no real measure put in place to show that, okay, you are a key population. Besides the lubes and condoms and ARVs, what else can we do for you? And most of the allied and those that are saying they are pro-LGBTQI are very silent at this time. So it really shows a lot needs to be done. And as organizations, we really banded together as the LGBTQI sector to really help out as much as we can. But in times like this, showing that the results and effects of COVID-19 will long surpass this present moment, and cases are escalating and skyrocketing. So measures really need to be put in place to I don't know how we can do it. Maybe it takes a whole total rebranding or reframing of our our strategic plans as the organizations. And even I'm hoping donors will also realize that we need to actually look beyond just the rights fight, because it's very difficult to advocate for our rights when people are thinking of basic bread and butter issues. I mean, particularly the LGBTQI persons. We found ourselves having to move away from our mandates and giving people things as basic as mealie meal. And we're glad that there have been donors who have been flexible to actually allow for that, to use their funds in that manner. Because in this reality, it's very difficult to, not that rights are not important, because they are equally important. Like I just said about the marriage rights, for example. Not that that is a priority for us, but it shows in times like this that things like that we've always taken for granted are actually things that matter, because it's very difficult to maneuver in these times. But also coming back to the topic, I feel I'm straying a bit. I think it's important to understand that most of the LGBTQI persons in Zimbabwe particularly, and particularly centering it here in Bulawayo, but I think I would speak honestly for those in Zimbabwe as a whole, it's very difficult for us to flourish, because most of us, I remember in the beginning of the year when COVID was still a Western problem, most people are saying, this is my year, I'm going to conquer. And it's very depressing to see your dreams flushed away. People had made investments, people had started businesses with the hope of turning their lives around this year. As we always do in the beginning of the year, we make new commitments, and it's very depressing to realize that that's all falling apart. And I was joking with a friend of mine that we cannot celebrate our birthdays this year. Let's just skip this year, and then we continue next year, because it's really feels like a wasted year. But I'm sure there's learn from it, and we can hopefully grow from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. McLean, let me invite you back again now, just on how Zambians have dealt with this, and where support has been coming from, and what you believe our community, but not only in Southern Africa but globally, can learn from the various sources of support that you've experienced.
Okay, thank you once again. I would just like to react to Caroline when she was talking about the economic impact of COVID. Not so far from the truth. If I can go back to my Zambian or local narrative. So when you look at income capacity or income levels of LGBTI, most of the community or most LGBTIs, in a way, they get validated or get accepted in the communities or in the family because you earn something. So even when they look at you, not as first priority, like my colleague said, so when you have an income, you are accepted, in quotations. So you really hang on to that high income earning or income earning level, just so that you can retain your place in your community. But in the light of COVID, this reality was shattered, unfortunately. So you're looking at the cost of being, like I talked about, the impact on the communities, impact on businesses. LGBTI people are in businesses or in formal employment, and several of them lost their employment or lost their jobs. So what does that mean? It means that now your place in family is suddenly questioned, and also even the self-esteem starts to dip. So in terms of mental health, that was such it's been a very, very big impact on many LGBTI, just waking up to the reality that your business is sinking or be gone forever. Just the realization that you don't have an income, and what can you give your family? How can you still validate yourself within the family space because you don't have anything going on for you? So I just wanted to react to that. But also in terms of the lockdown, it's been also been hard. So we are talking about people that mobile. So I'll talk about sex workers who are also part of the LGBTI community. That has also been quite a challenge. So our friends, their business could be very mobile, but suddenly because of the national lockdown, you can't go anywhere. You have to be home. So how do you earn your income? How do you meet your clients, and so forth? So the COVID for me on the economic front, it really revealed this deep divide between the haves and the have-nots within the LGBTI community. And I've always said the community is not one community, as we'd like to call it, because there are different individuals within the LGBTI community. There are different socioeconomic classes, different earning levels, races, ethnicity, etc. And everybody has got different norms and values and all those things. So when you see the impact of the COVID, we see that some people, where their lives were not so affected, they continued with their jobs or their income businesses. Others, just overnight, their lives completely changed. And the support system just isn't there. So in terms of how Zambia has addressed the issues, or how Zambia has, where the support has come from, how did we access this support? So firstly, when the national lockdown came in and we saw the adverse effects of COVID, of course, the first thing was to rapid response funding. I think quite a number of funders came on board, offering support in terms of a continuity of programs and operations of various organizations. So that was the first stream of help or support. That was the rapid response assistance, but not everyone could get the assistance. A few of them got the assistance. But of course, in light of that, most of us organizations decided to look within ourselves. What resources do we have? Monetary, technical, so that our services are not disrupted, our visibility as organizations, as advocates, we still remain visible. So we had to look within our resources, which are quite limited. But also we looked at the running grants that we have, various organizations, what sort of budget lines could be renegotiated. I think a number of funders were open to that. So just to ensure that you have activities going on and observing the social distancing and hygiene. And social media was very, very key in terms of messages dissemination to our communities. And I think all local organizations have got Facebook presence or social media presence, and they use that to the max to ensure that correct messages were disseminated to the community, because anytime something comes up in the world, the global stage, fake news is everywhere. So we realized that a lot of people were feeding on fake news. So we took it upon ourselves as leaders to show leadership to ensure that community members got the correct information about COVID. Of course, at the national level, government was also very, very active, proactive in terms of dissemination of information. So that was the way that we responded to these challenges. So and where has this support come from? Of course, I've talked about that. And what can we learn from this situation or the COVID?
McLean, let me ask you to just pause for there, please, and then we'll swing back and have you just respond to what we can learn there. I just want to invite Jolerina back in, and you touched on the challenges with access to health, Jolerina, during this time. What recommendations do you have, just from your experience, and even your experience prior to the lockdowns and before COVID-19 was even a reality for any of us? What steps should the community be taking in order to adequately support trans people during this time and, of course, going forward?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I believe that there is a lot that we need to do as a community and as a country as a whole, right? And so, firstly, looking at legislation, for example, having inclusive policies in place that doesn't leave room for justification to stigmatize and discriminate particular sections of the community, for example. Also, the fact that even as a community, as the LGBT community, right, and as partner organization, as the Global South, the lack of solidarity and assistance during times like this also rose a lot of eyebrows for me and made me question, is our struggle real? Are we there for one another? Are we siblings in arms? You know, are they allies? And these were the questions that I was sitting with, knowing for sure with the partner organizations out there, with the allies out there that have always been campaigning and walking with us the road to ensure that we ascertain our rights. But then at the end of the day, when the COVID hit, donors went silent. All you were told was, no, we are dealing with a pandemic. All of our lives and everything came to a halt. So there was no activities, no resources for us to implement anything, no support that we as an organization could also give to our communities, right? Because there was no help out there. The COVID funds that were released were only, I think were just for particular parts of the world or something. We applied, even the two trans organizations in the country that applied for COVID assistance, both did not make it. Both organizations did not get anything. So if organizations aren't able to take care of themselves and their communities, what else is there to do? We were literally helpless and hopeless, sitting here wondering where to from here. Where does my help come from, right? Are we only brothers in arms when one partner is definitely in need and then we are seen as a token to jump in and assist them to achieve a particular goal? Or are we in partners even in times of crisis to be able to say, okay, fine, the assistance that I was able to give you, I will not be able to give you. Can we rather revert back and see how we can make this work? But large sums of the funding, for example, that we're getting is going to be diverted for COVID, right? And not leave partner organizations or smaller organizations like ours just hanging by the thread. And there was a lot of engagement with other partner organizations that we have had where they try to assist and they have been in consultation till now to be able to assist us, be able to take cover costs for rent, for example, for our office, be able to operate normally, be able to at least communicate with our communities to find out what is happening on the ground. And the response also is it's an emergency, right? And the responses are not in a fashion of an emergency, right? There's consultations, conversations happening week on week, and there is no actual help or aid coming to us to be able to assist our communities in the field. So I felt literally during this time, I felt really alone. I felt there's no solidarity. I felt we talk a lot, but the assistance that we need is not there. And I literally had to sit there and question my advocacy, question the partnerships that I have, question the solidarity, the allies, all of these stakeholders and partners that have been part of my journey, of our journey as an organization, as a community. I had to sit and question all of these things. You know, I literally felt left down. I literally felt disappointed. I literally felt, is all of the advocacy and work that we're doing worth it? You know, should we give up? What should we do? Where to from here, right? And the psychological implications that this had on me as also a leader, the mental health issues that I've been struggling during this time because of the lack of solidarity, the lack of support in the time of emergency was literally heartbreaking. And just the fact that you are sitting here unable to help yourself, your community expects you to do something and you're unable to help them as well, you feel literally hopeless and helpless in this instance. And I feel that there is much need for solidarity, greater solidarity beyond what is beneficial for both of us. But in case of such instances, right, how do we pull together? How do we resource together? How do we assist one another and not just look at me, myself, right? But how do I look at the next
Jolerina, I think
communication where I literally feel it is.
So we were just losing you there for a minute, but please continue.
Yeah, so I think the issue that my colleagues also raised around acceptance, because if you don't put something on the table and that is taken away or that is no longer the case, then you feel further violated. Our economy has also been really heavily hit as a country. So already we are marginalized, and then tourism sector is not bringing in money because of the lockdown. There are retrenchments across hospitality industries where much of our communities also work in, and it's like further putting them in an uncomfortable situation where they will definitely have to suffer the consequences of this pandemic because they can't put something on the table. The respect and the validation that they got at home is taken away. Even the tolerance is taken away because now you are just another extra mouth that the family needs to feed, right? That somebody else needs to cover for because you're unable to take care of yourself. And already your gender identity and sexual orientation is a big factor because you are bringing shame to the family. And people still, because of religion and culture, stigmatize the family because of your identity or sexual orientation. So these are factors that definitely have been issues that we've been dealing with. So I believe that once looking forward, we need greater solidarity, not only in a context of funding, but also just in context of resources, in context of voice, in context of, being there for one another. Just a checkup is also something that I believe changes somebody's mood or day, right? Just to say, hey, how are you hanging up? Are you holding up well? And that is something that I haven't been seeing during this time. There's a few partners that we're doing that, but the greater part of the partners that and allies that we've been working with, nobody has been checking in to say, yo, guys, how are you holding up? Are you fine? There were donors who reached out and said, how are you coping mental health wise? All of these things. And after you have given them the summary of what is going on, then it's like, we'll get back to you. Till today, nothing, right? And so one sits and questions a lot of things. And I think we need greater solidarity in the movement for us to be able to move forward, for us to be there for one another in these times.
Thank you very much, Jolerina. And we have an attendee who, in fact, is just thanking you for raising the issue of solidarity. Nomvula, on the chat saying here, I was wondering whether the LGBTQI experience is experiencing the same kind of solidarity that we witnessed in communities in general, and you've spoken to that indeed. Finn, let me come to you. Please feel free to respond to any of the comments that have already been mentioned. But just as a question from my side before we wrap it up with Anthony, and then take more questions that are coming in both on Facebook as well as in the Q&A. And I'd like to just encourage attendees to start posting those questions because we're getting to those in a moment. But Finn, if you can just speak to, again, you touched on it briefly as we started, but just the questions around the kinds of research that we need to start looking at, the kinds of questions we need to start asking ourselves that will essentially support our community broadly.
Right, thanks, Abinsile. Yeah, I think it's just recognize the importance of Jolerina's comments about solidarity and not losing those connections and that care for each other. I've seen some of the really great questions on the chat function as well, Abinsile, in terms of some of these issues. And I think it is important to focus on the fact that not all people bear the burden of the global pandemic in the same way. It's a very obvious statement, but it needs to be articulated. Not everybody bears the burden of this pandemic in the same way, nor do they bear the effects of state responses equally. People experience and groups experience state responses in different ways. And we know that globally, with the deepening inequalities, that those people who are living in poverty are more likely to be experiencing an exacerbated form of pandemic. We know that the pandemic and the state responses have disproportionately affected women in terms of access to sexual and reproductive health, contraception. We know, according to our colleagues from UNFPA, also from the Guttmacher Institute, that there will be a severe spike, so to speak, in unintended pregnancies globally as a result of lack of access to contraception because of the lockdown globally. We know that displaced and homeless people around the world are going to be experiencing a disproportionate effect of the pandemic and the lockdowns, as will people with disabilities, who have in many ways experienced challenges of access that people are only now beginning to understand in some small way. And I think there's much to be learned from the disability movement in relation to the politics of the current process and the constraints on people's lives in many ways. LGBTI people, as we're discussing today, are differentially impacted. Intersectionality is a key lens for understanding the ways in which people's lived experiences and multiple identities determine their experiences of these black swan events like a global pandemic as we're experiencing at the moment, as well, of course, as young people. We know that COVID, or there are concerns that COVID as a result risks halting, if not even reversing in some cases, some of the global efforts and some of the global wins in terms of sexual and reproductive health rights, supports and services. We know that some of the ministers from around the world have written on this and expressed concern about the implications of state responses in terms of a deprioritization of sexual and reproductive health. And particularly, I think, in contexts where development continues to be a priority area and a priority focus in terms of alleviating and raising people out of poverty, and the implications of that for people who are going to be jeopardized, are going to be affected in multiple ways by state response. I think just one of those responses, Sabinzile, is the redirection of funds that were previously directed towards sexual and reproductive health, including for marginalized groups, and perhaps a redirecting of those funds to other, now more pressing, in some instances, public health concerns. I can say, Sabinzile, from in terms of young people themselves, at the HSRC, I lead a project called Schools Out, which was funded by Amplify Change. And the project is a partnership between the HSRC, between researchers and civil society organizations across 10 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. And the Schools Out project is work between researchers and civil society in terms of ensuring that young people in schools are linked to and are able to access the sexual and reproductive health supports and services that they need. And of course, these past few months have been a very troubling time in relation to that, given school closures, and as a result, concerns about access to comprehensive sexuality education and access to other sexual and reproductive health supports and services that could be provided in, around, or through the schooling system. I can speak more to the research engagement, Sabinzile, in a moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Finn. And Anthony, and I'm glad this theme of solidarity just kind of happened to emerge from Jillerina's comments to Finn's comments, and I'd love your thoughts now on what global solidarity might look like over the next 18 to 24 months as we all try and recover, whenever that recovery will start from this pandemic, economically, politically, socially. How do we still, as a movement, attempt to do the work that we do, meet and achieve our goals, do impactful work in what will be a new normal?
It is actually going to be a new normal. I mean, as McLean said earlier, what COVID has shown is, what this pandemic has shown is the incredible inequality within our community, not only within the LGBT community, but in society in general. As someone said to me yesterday, that we all knew that these differences existed. We all knew that, hey, we were in an unequal society. But what this pandemic has done is that there is no one who is not going to be affected by it. Everyone is affected. The rich, the poor, the white, the black people, the LGBT people, straight people, people living with disability. Everyone is going to be affected, is being affected by the pandemic in one way or another. So in terms of what the global solidarity would look like, and I'm actually really glad that Jollerina mentions solidarity within our community. we will have to basically have a broader sense of solidarity as a community, as a society. We will have to not only look at ourselves as LGBT people, but look at ourselves, our place within this pandemic. Look at our place within this pandemic, because more than 700,000 people have lost their jobs. There are 700,000 jobs have been lost. Within that 700,000 jobs are LGBT jobs, are women's jobs. Even though, according to the statistics, I think 60% of the people who've lost the jobs are women. There exists within that the intersectionality, and looking at this pandemic, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of people who are affected by it. Yes, the numbers do help. Yes, we can look at how many people have died and say, hey, this is not killing as many people. But looking at it as, hey, 100 people have died, that's 100 individuals who have lost their lives, and 100 families who've lost people around them, and that's 100 people who've basically gone away from their friends. So looking at numbers, well, yes, numbers are important. Look at them in terms of the individual lives that are being lost. So global solidarity for me, socially, it's about, being there for each other, being there, just a lot more than saying, hey, are you hungry? Can I buy you food? But being there in terms of, are you really okay? And when you're asking that question, are you okay, mean it, not just saying it because it's part of what you're supposed to be asking people. Politically, there will be differences in responses. There will be contextual differences in whatever we do in South Africa will be different from what they do in Zimbabwe, which will be different from what they do in East Africa. And it has been different. And you've seen the responses have been very contextually different. But looking at those responses in terms of how do they affect the people on the ground? How do they affect the people who are basically living from day to day? How do those responses affect those people? And have those political responses, informed by that factor? And that is also going to bring us back to the whole economic solidarity. Because once we've thought about the day-to-day people who are living from day to day, then we're basically improving our society from the ground up. And those are my thoughts on how this could work.
Brilliant, Anthony. Thank you. I'll invite now some other expert voices who we just asked to join us and have the comments for a minute ready for us. Dumisani Dube joins us now, and Dumisani, thank you for your time. If you could just briefly give us a sense of what the role of the religious sector has been, their contribution in supporting the community, particularly because the community, or some members of the community, have not been able to access state support, whether it's food parcels or the additional grants, for example, that have been put out by some states. Could you just give us a sense of what's been happening from the religious front?
Okay, thank you very much, Sebenzile. As I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly well. Go ahead, Dumisani.
Thank you. The commission of I'm from Holy Trinity LGBTI Ministry, and our commission as the Holy Trinity LGBTI Ministry is to provide emotional and psychological support to marginalized LGBTI, especially the refugees. So we also do function as a referral point to the community for various service providers, which could be legal, health, and so on. So what we have seen is that there is so much unemployment in queer refugees, mostly caused by being undocumented, of which some of them have resorted to sex work, which now cannot happen because of lockdown regulations. And because of they are they are undocumented, there is no government subsidy, and their livelihoods have been so much affected. As some were informal traders and were doing so many things that have been affected by lockdown regulations. Although already even before lockdown, there has been quite a problem of them being underpaid because they are still undocumented, and this has led to them living from hand to mouth, and there have been no savings. So they have been displaced. Some have been displaced from their places of dwellings because of lack of paying rent and the funds to sustain themselves. So we're having no family and no places to go, and the regulations also say that nobody can move from one place to another, and some not and some people are not even willing to take them in. We have also realized the cases of violence and physical abuse in some who are in live-in relationships, and in one case I have had to take in one person who has been in an abusive relationship and live with them. So what we have done as the Holy Trinity LGBTI Ministry, we have partnered with a few organizations, namely Gala, Sister Mura, ICANN, Joburg Pride, and Pride Africa, to set up a GoFund initiative, which has managed to help about 73 plus recipients, giving them a few some kind of startup to keep them going. And with Sister Mira Foundation, we started since the lockdown started, giving people about 13 recipients 1,500 each to help them pay their rent and buy essentials. And with Joburg Pride and Pride Africa, we have had food parcels and jackets since it's winter. And what also we have done just for mental and anxiety problems, just to avoid some of those things, we have set up a Skype meeting that we have every Sunday, and WhatsApp group video calls, which will keep everybody talking, and then we share jokes and pray together. But because of lockdown, again, still in place, there is need to carry on seeking more help to sustain and make them as comfortable as possible. Sebenzele, thank you.
Dumisani, thank you very much for your input. I'd like to invite Ava Tankamutu, who is an academic who is based in Mauritius. Ava, thank you very much for your time. If you could just briefly give us a sense of what's been happening in Mauritius. All right, we'll come back to Ava. I think just as we were about to go to them, we lost connectivity. Let's move to Zimkita Guma, who is with the Plus Network, as we get a perspective from the business side of things. What kind of support have they been able to give? What kind of requests have been coming in from the business side of things? And then going forward, those resources are going to be very important to keep the movement going. Zimkita? Zimkita, are you with us? All right, we're not winning on that front. I tell you what, we'll try to sort that out. Let me pick up some of the questions that have come in here. So let's start with this, and Caroline, perhaps you can respond to this. It's a question that's been asked for any of the panelists. It's from an anonymous who asks, how do we advocate for the emphasis and awareness to government and societal organizations that it is a fact that LGBTI plus persons are disproportionately affected by the vast dire impact of this global pandemic? And they're going to say, especially given that they see the brunt of the impacted is the poor in general, regardless of gender and sexuality. And what does the communication of this reality from mainstream media and those who are potentially somewhat privileged need to look like and really say? Caroline?
Okay. I think I like that the media is being involved in that, because it has really been one of the greatest challenges that we've had as a community, where you are interviewed, you say one thing, and you read the article and it says something else. So I think as media personnel, I'm guessing this is someone from the media, or maybe someone who has an interest to know how the media can be engaged. I think it's important that when talking about lived realities, well, it's layered, but the first key thing is to share lived realities. And I mean that in every sense, lived realities. And then once that is done, it's important that those lived realities are not the African child with the fly on their nose, but actual experiences of real people, people that are relatable, people that I know when it comes to the media, there's a lot about perceptions, that because media is responsible for driving perceptions. So the image that they show, in as much as it's lived realities, there's always an angle. It's just that they never want to pick our angle that's pro us. It's always an angle that shows us in a certain way that they want. So I think as media personnel, it's important that how we engage the media should be such that its media personnel are able to portray us in a way that is relatable, that can change perceptions to a way that people actually understand us. Because these governments and all that are made up of individuals that belong to our communities, people that go to our churches, people that came from our neighborhoods, in as much as some of them might not live there anymore. But these are general people, and they have people around them that also inform where they end up coming up with policy and all that. It's all informed by human interaction. So as media, when we engage the media, it's important that we show lived realities that are relatable and show, not to drive empathy, but to actually show us in the most natural setting where people can really understand that these people, because there are a lot of misconceptions about us, where people think we are rich, we've sold our souls to the devil. There's so much that people think about us, which is not true. So it's important that we are shown as human beings, just like everyone else. And these stories are shared with those people. And it's important that even when we discuss the LGBTQI plus community, LGBTQI plus persons are there in the room, because in as much as allies help, sometimes allies do not understand the issues. I think particularly for trans persons, but for all of us really in general, there's a lack of understanding for our lived realities. So it's important that we are put in these rooms, or we claim our spaces in these rooms where we are discussed and we actually start to change perceptions at that level. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Just for that perspective from the business front, let me invite Dean Ebden to speak just briefly to what the experience has been over the last period. And Dean is also with Plus. Dean, thank you for joining us. What has been your experience as Plus over this period? Kindly unmute yourself, please, Dean.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you are. Hi, Dean.
Hi. I was saying thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to be a part of this very important discussion. I speak on I represent two organizations. Firstly, as a business person, I've been in business for the last 25 years, and I was also a part of a process that led to the establishment of Plus, the LGBTI Business Network, which is a network that advocates for equal and fair opportunity in the business sector in South Africa. All I can say is that it has been an extremely hemorrhaging time for us as business people. Our businesses have bled profoundly. In terms of support, I'm not sure, where we can turn to. Government has been very great in terms of paper, but with regards to implementation, it's very, very difficult. I'm yet to meet one person, let alone a LGBTQ person, who has accessed all these wonderful plans that government had in place in terms of lending support to businesses. It's a lonely road. Unfortunately, we sit in our businesses, not sure of where to go to, what to do. The supply chain has completely been disrupted in respect of how we access business, where we access business to. I speak as a gay man in this regard. Business has been good for me over the last couple of years. Up until COVID, it was a complete disaster. I've had to let go of 3 people in my employ. I've had to retrench 3 people. And just the basic, the political response has been great. I mean, South Africa, our government has been superb. The issues come in with regard to implementation and the criteria applied to accessing this kind of money that we need in terms of keeping our businesses afloat. And with regard to Plus as an organization, we were making great inroads in terms of our strategy with regard to accessing corporates and getting new members, etc. All of that stuff has come to an abrupt end, So yeah, it's a really bad time. It's a really bad time for business, and I'm not sure personally, I'm not sure how we're going to navigate to the other side. I don't have the answers for that, except to say, you keep on trying to keep your business afloat, to ensure that, the good that you can do, you extend your influence to your community. But beyond that, it's a really, really, really tough situation. And I think what this virus has shown us is that it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discriminate against gay, trans, white, black, pink, blue. We are all facing huge business imperatives. And for me personally, at this stage, my focus is on how do I survive? How do I get to the other side?
Dean, thank you very much for your contribution. There's a question here, and I'll ask McLean to respond to this. The question, McLean, is how can we become allies in your struggle as European LGBTIQ plus communities? That's from Gabriella, who's asking that. How can the European community assist us in our struggle?
Thank you for that. Quite a loaded question. I'm not sure how I can frame this. How can the European allies support our local movement in this time? I think the traditional way of raising funding to the movement, I think that's one of the key ways that we can address the issue of solidarity, but also just to strengthen the movement as a whole. I mean, when you're looking at our country, we're not talking about one organization, we're talking about more than 6 organizations, and already this movement is united in one body, so that there's complementarity of efforts. So for me, I think it starts from there. That movement is strengthened to respond to challenges as they come, not to support one after the other. I mean, when you support one organization only, the other ones are left behind. But if you look at the movement as a whole, that way you are supporting one movement, and in doing that, you are building the solidarity of the local movement to deliver the required services to the community.
Thank you very much, McLean. Finn, there was a question about what an organization such as the Other Foundation should be doing at this time and could be doing in the medium to longer term.
Thanks, Sebenzile. One way is to strengthen the research base, to develop the evidence base, to get some answers to some of the questions, to be able to document some of the realities that we're talking about. We know that a strong evidence base in relation to LGBTI experience is a necessity when it comes to inclusive policy and the implementation of that policy, as well as strengthening advocacy when the research is impact focused and it's a partnership between queer civil society and researchers looking at and understanding more deeply from an implementation science perspective what works and when and where and how, what we need to be doing on the ground. So it's about developing these partnerships, Zile, between the research on one side and civil society and communities on the other, in terms of strengthening the sustainability and the resilience of the civil society sector. We need a more coordinated approach to research and developing the evidence base at regional and national levels. We need to plug the data gap that we have around our knowledge that we can then use in terms of advocating for change with a range of national and regional stakeholders. We need to be doing research that matters, which the Other Foundation is already doing, and a credit to the Foundation for that important work, the survey work and other types of data collection and research that matters in service to advocacy that makes a difference. Thanks.
Finn, thank you very much. And I just to do a time check, we are already at 2 minutes after the time when we had promised to wrap it up. However, there's so many questions. So if you would kindly just give us another 15 minutes of your time, just so that we can get to a few more questions and then wrap it up with our panelists. Anthony, perhaps you can take this one. Euphemia asks, some countries in Asia, like China and South Korea, have used digital monitoring of the population to combat the transmission of the COVID-19. Do you think African governments could adopt similar, under the guise, or similar strategies, I imagine they mean, under the guise of ensuring health? And if so, what could be the effect of that on the LGBTQ community? Could it lead to more state repression?
I think it could lead to more state repression. I think these digital monitoring platforms have been tried by different movements. I believe that in the HIV field there was a trial of trying to document people by fingerprinting them and doing that. And what that essentially does is that it leaves a database that you do not know what the government is going to use that database for. For LGBT people in most parts of Africa, there have been same-sex conduct is criminalized in most parts of Africa. There are state-sanctioned violations on people because of the fact that they're LGBT. So I mean, these measures may have worked in those countries in Asia. These measures may have they may have made an impact in those countries. But if you look closely at those countries, they're very, very oppressive to people. And if we take that and put it in our context, then a context which are already oppressive of LGBT people, contexts which are already oppressive of persons living with HIV, contexts which are already oppressive of persons living with disability, and then and put in something like putting a tracker on people, it will be quite difficult to manage. It will be very difficult to have it work in such a way that LGBT people are safe.
Thank you, Anthony. Julie, really, there was a question from Wendy about what the interactions or engagements have been with funders during this time? I know you responded to it in the chat, but just for the benefit for the people who are streaming this conversation on Facebook, what have those interactions been with funders during this period, and how do you hope that it will change going forward, or how do you hope it will improve going forward?
Because of the COVID-19, many of the funders have cut the budgets, right? And so the conversations were, how do we move from here? Because as organizations, we also need to continue operating. So how is that going to impact us as an organization? So we have had conversations with our donors to say, so what is the way forward? For a few months, it was quite, since COVID hit, it was silence, right? No communication. We're sitting here stressing ourselves to bits, wondering what is the way forward now, hoping to receive an answer. And recently we got feedback that yes, our budget has been cut tremendously down, only to cover overhead costs, which means definitely office space and operational cost, as well as salaries for the staff, and which also has been cut down significantly. So there will be some sort of a bit of salary and a bit of office space monies that we can pay and so forth. So that is the communication that we have been having. But still, we are still waiting. After that conversation, we are still waiting when these monies will arrive, because we are overdue with our office rent and all of those things. So all our lives are still hanging in the balance. So the money hasn't, the conversation has happened, but the funds are not yet here. We are still waiting. And some funders did come through and offer to assist with sanitizers, masks, and all of those things. And so we are still waiting for that conversation to be concluded. But that conversation has happened and the assistance was pledged. So that is why I was, even earlier when I was alluding to the fact that yes, we are having conversations, ongoing conversations, but the help is not yet here. The help is pledged, but it's not yet here. And if we are saying it's an emergency and we need to assist our communities and help, then donors and funders also need to act with haste in that sense, to say it is an emergency. In order for people to procure all of these things, we need to act with time and precision to be able to assist the communities on the ground. But we have had the conversations and we are still waiting. So if you don't have the money, you don't have the power, so we have to sit back and relax and wait till one day we decide, okay, fine, the time is now to hand over the money. So.
Thank you very much, Julerina. Final question that we'll take from our audience. Caroline, kindly respond to this, please. The question from Pearl Makashula, who asks, how do we ensure that we guard against rollbacks on movement gains as we simultaneously fight COVID-19?
I think the first key step is to actually document those gains systematically in a way that makes sense, to say, you know what, this is how far we've come. Because if we don't know what we're holding on to or trying to hold on to, then we will not be able to measure it, or we will not be able to hold on to it. So we need to be able to actually take time out, and as movements, I like how in Zambia the organizations are working together, and it's almost the same here in Zimbabwe, where we have sector meetings and we update each other on progress. It's really worked even within the COVID times now, but before that, it was something that was there already. So I think it's important to have such measures in place where we constantly check in on our progress and how much, and in this instance, I'm sure there isn't much movement forward going on, but taking time, I'm a big believer in looking back in order to look forward, realizing how far we've come, closing those generational gaps, taking time to actually learn from those that were there before us, and also taking time to groom and be role models for the younger activists that are many and vast in this community, and very skilled and innovative individuals in their own right to actually close those generational gaps and actually take time to account for the progress we've made and to actually take time to draw up sector strategies or movement strategies, even if it's a Southern African strategy or a regional strategy or a continental strategy. I know there are different contexts within each country, but at the end of the day, there are intersecting points. And that's where we need to really grow, because there's strength in knowing that you have someone. I think also in these COVID times, as it's taking its toll on our mental health, it's important that we actually take time to understand that we have friends and allies within the LGBTQI plus community who actually live in other countries. Like, I like the question from someone asking how European LGBTQI plus activists can also be allies. It shows that there is solidarity somewhat within us. And it's important that we carry on that tangent of building solidarity within ourselves first, and then looking out, further expanding those intersections and actually tracking, because it's not just our movement that's losing traction. The women's movement is losing traction. Like Finn was saying, SRHR progress is dwindling and being set back as well, not just for queer women, but for women in general. The youth movement is losing traction. The disability movement is losing track. So we need to find those intersecting points and actually move forward, however slowly we are, but not be stagnant as movements and grow as a movement ourselves. Yeah, I think that's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for those comments. We are completely out of time, and thank you once again to everyone who's joined us, to folks who are in the room and those who are streaming on Facebook. Just a final 30 seconds from the panel as we wrap up what has really been an insightful and fruitful conversation. And thank you once again to all of you for joining us as panelists in our conversation. Anthony, final 30 seconds from you.
Final 30 seconds. We can do this. We can get through this, but we can only get through this by working together. We can only get through this by working as one. It will be difficult, but we can do this.
Brilliant. Thank you. McLean?
Yes, thanks once again for the opportunity. But for me, I think it's a parting shot. What can we do in the region? And for me, I think going forward, we should integrate COVID literacy in programming, and also we should just reposition our organizations to be very resilient, business-minded, so that even in the event of things like COVID, we don't look to our funders all the time to get some resources, but within ourselves. So I think in-house development, I think it's very, very important, and community support structures to ensure that aspects of mental health, economic survival are all taken care of within the movement. Leadership is front and center. It's key. Thank you.
Thank you, McLean. Finn?
We need to be using our resources even more effectively and even more strategically, not only now, but in the next few years. And a part of that will be to leverage the resilience that clearly is here among our organizations and our communities, and leverage that resilience in terms of moving forward. I think it is important that we continue to focus on knowledge production, on developing the evidence base, so we can make compelling arguments for policy and advocacy moving forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Finn. Jolerina?
Thank you very much. The only thing that I would like to reiterate is to say that we are here, we are alive, we are together in this, right? Basically, my play out, and so it should be a renaissance for all of us to say we hold and move together and advocate together. It's all about many resources, so sharing information and building each other this time of need. So let's move forward. Let's see how we can build this community solidarity, and women build is very important within society, and especially during these times. So let's get on board. Let's hold hands, unite, and together we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolerina. And Caroline, last 30 seconds from you.
Right. I'll try and keep it short. I think key thing, your struggle is my struggle. And once we understand that and we continuously check in with each other, when someone says they're fine, doesn't mean they're fine. Really dig deep and question how they're feeling until they open up to you. It's important that we constantly check on each other, even across borders. It means so much to get a call from Swaziland. Thanks, Jay. And it really means so much when someone checks on you. It shows that you matter, particularly when we're living with our families, and sometimes not all of us are seen as priorities. I think it's important that we are valued, to show that we are valued, particularly by our comrades that we are away from at this moment. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Caroline. I'm told that Dean, you also just have final comments as well. Dean, are you there? All right. On that note, that's where we'll then wrap it up, folks. Thank you very much once again. We appreciate your time, love and solidarity during this tough time. But it's been tough even before this particular period. We look forward to engaging further and hope that the next couple of months, as tough as we anticipate they will be, that our resilience once again will keep us together. Thank you and goodbye.